Daughter-in-law called the police on me for showing up at my own son's house. The next morning, I mailed her a plain white envelope. She thought it was an apology letter. She called my son laughing about it. Until she opened it and read what was inside, she didn't laugh after that. I was refinishing a set of old bookshelves in my garage when my son called. Maplewood, 1970s, the kind they don't make anymore. I'd found them at an estate sale in Concord, New Hampshire the previous spring, paid $40 for the pair. I was sanding the second coat when the phone buzzed against the workbench. "Dad, we need to talk about Thanksgiving." I set the sandpaper down. My son Adrian is 41 years old. He has my late wife's eyes and my stubbornness, a combination that has never done either of us any favors. I could tell from the first word that he wasn't calling to chat. "Sure, what about it?" His wife Renata didn't want me coming this year. That's how he said it. Renata didn't want. Not we decided, not we were thinking. Renata didn't want. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. "I'm sorry, what?" He explained it. She felt things were tense. She felt my presence made the holidays stressful. She felt it would be better if I spent Thanksgiving with my sister in Portland, Maine this year. "Adrian, I have spent Thanksgiving with you every year since your mother died." "I know, Dad." 8 years. Every single year." "I know. And your wife feels it would be better if I went to Portland." He didn't answer right away. Outside the garage, a neighbor's leaf blower started up. I sat on the edge of the workbench. The smell of wood stain and sawdust was suddenly overwhelming. "She thinks you don't respect her," he finally said. "I respect her fine. She says you correct her in front of people. I told her once that the plural of cactus is cacti. Once. At a dinner party 3 years ago." He exhaled. "Dad, it's just one Thanksgiving." It wasn't just one Thanksgiving. I understood that much. You don't call to uninvite your father from a single holiday. You call when something has been building for a long time and someone finally said enough. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't go to Portland. My wife Ruth died of ovarian cancer in the fall of 2016. We were married for 37 years. She was a librarian, a terrible driver, and the best person I have ever known. When she was sick, our son was there every weekend. He drove up from Boston, sat with her, read to her when her eyes got too tired. He was a good son then. I used to tell people that. I was proud of who he was. He met Renata at a work conference in 2018. She was in corporate consulting. Polished, precise, the kind of woman who plans her calendar 6 months out and considers spontaneity a character flaw. She wasn't unkind to me at first. She shook my hand firmly, asked appropriate questions, remembered that I taught high school history for 30 years. She seemed like someone who would be good for him. The first sign was small. Christmas 2019. I arrived at their apartment in Boston with a wreath I'd made from balsam fir from my own yard. Ruth used to make them every year. I made one for the first time after she died, badly, and then kept making them until I got better at it. Renata accepted it, thanked me, and when I came out of the bathroom 20 minutes later, it was leaning against the wall near the coat closet. Not hung, not displayed, set aside, the way you set aside something you intend to throw away later. I noticed, didn't say anything. By 2020, it was small redirections. She started answering questions I directed at Adrian. I'd ask him something about the house. She'd answer. I'd ask about his job. She'd tell me how things were going. He'd look at her and nod. I told myself she was just an engaged person, that not everyone saw it the way I did. By 2021, she'd started calling me by my first name without asking. I'm 64 years old. When I meet someone's father for the first time, I call him sir until he tells me otherwise. I'd never told her otherwise. The Thanksgiving call was November 2022. I spent the holiday alone. Made myself a proper meal, turkey breast, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, the way Ruth used to make them. Ate at the dining room table with the good china, because I refused to eat a sad meal off a paper plate just because my daughter-in-law had decided I wasn't welcome. Set a place for Ruth out of habit. Caught myself looking at the empty chair and had to stop. Adrian called at 7 that evening. How was Portland? He'd forgotten I hadn't gone. I told him it was fine. The following March was when things changed. My neighbor Bud Halloran, retired postal worker, big man, bad knees, had been helping me sort through Ruth's remaining boxes from the attic. I'd been avoiding them for 6 years. Bud brought coffee, didn't ask questions, just helped carry and organize. We found her teaching notebooks, her reading journals, her collection of Christmas cards going back to 1985. We found a shoebox with old photos, and inside that shoebox, underneath a rubber-banded stack of pictures from our 1988 camping trip to Acadia, was a folded piece of paper. It was in Ruth's handwriting, a list, 4 names and $4 amounts. Adrian's name was at the top. Below it was a number I didn't recognize. I sat on the attic floor for a long time holding that piece of paper. Bud had gone downstairs to refill the coffee. I heard him moving around in the kitchen. I looked at my wife's handwriting and tried to understand what I was seeing. The total across all 4 names was $42,000. Ruth had a small investment account I'd known about. She managed it herself, had since before we were married. She never touched the principal, always said it was her safety net. She didn't discuss it often. I didn't ask about it often. We were private people in certain ways, even from each other. She had clearly given money to people. The list had dates going back to 2019. Adrian's amount was $14,000. I called our accountant, a man named Philip, who had done our taxes for 20 years. He confirmed that Ruth had liquidated a significant portion of her account in installments between 2019 and 2022, the year she had passed. He hadn't flagged it because the amounts were legal and within her rights as the sole account holder. He'd assumed she was gifting to family, which was common. It was gifting to family, technically. The question was whether Adrian knew. I did not ask him directly. I'm a retired history teacher. I know that the person who asks first shows their hand. I called my nephew Owen instead. Owen is 35, works in financial compliance in Manchester, and is constitutionally incapable of pretending something isn't interesting when it is. He met me for lunch at a diner on Elm Street. I showed him Ruth's list. He looked at it a long time. "Uncle Gerald," he said, and then paused. "Where did you find this?" "Attic. Shoebox." "And you haven't talked to Adrian?" "Not yet." Owen asked if the amounts corresponded to anything he might have needed. A down payment, medical bills, a business investment. I told him I didn't know. He told me he could look at public records, nothing illegal, just property filings, business registrations, court documents, anything that might explain $14,000 moving from my wife's account to my son's life without me knowing about it. I said yes. 2 weeks later, Owen called me on a Tuesday evening. I was grading papers for the community college adjunct course I teach on American history. He said he found something. His voice was careful in the way voices get when the news is real. The condo they bought in Boston in 2020, he said. The down payment, public filing shows a gift letter from a family member. No name legally required, just the relationship. But the amount matches. 14,000. And there's something else. I set my pen down. There was a legal dispute in 2021, small claims, then escalated. Someone had sued Adrian for breach of a verbal agreement. A man named Calhoun, a contractor. The case was settled out of court in late 2021. No public settlement amount, but Owen had found a reference in a related filing to a payment of $12,000 resolving all outstanding claims. I looked at Ruth's list again. The second name, $12,000, dated October 2021. She had paid it. My wife, who was dying, who's in the middle of chemotherapy, had quietly liquidated her savings to pay her son's legal debt without telling me. I asked Owen if he thought Adrian had asked her for the money or if she had offered. He was quiet for a moment. He said in his experience, people don't make lists of what they've given someone unless they're keeping track, and people don't keep track unless they expect it might matter later. I thanked him, hung up, sat at my desk for a long time. The fourth name on the list was Renata's mother, down in Providence, Rhode Island. $2,000, June 2020. I couldn't account for that one at all. I still can't. I called Adrian the following Saturday morning. I kept my voice the same way I keep my voice when I'm teaching, level, curious, not telegraphing where I'm going. "Hey, Dad, what's up? I'm going through some of Mom's old paperwork. Just organizing. I came across something I wanted to ask you about. Sure. Did she ever help you out financially after she got sick? Brief pause. Yeah, actually. She helped us with the condo. You knew about that, right? I hadn't. Tell me about it. He explained it straightforwardly enough, no shame in his voice, which told me either he truly believed I'd known or he'd convinced himself the truth was close enough. Ruth had offered, he said. They'd been short on the down payment. She'd heard them talking about it at Easter. She'd called him the following week and insisted. He tried to tell her no. She wouldn't hear it. Did you know she paid Calhoun? Long pause. There it is, I thought. Dad, that was a complicated situation. I'm sure it was. Did you know? He said Renata had handled most of the communication with Mom during that period. He'd been traveling for work. He hadn't known the full amount until after. What does that mean? Renata handled it. It means she called Mom. She explained the situation. She asked if there was anything Mom could do. He said it quietly, like he was hearing it himself for the first time. I didn't say anything right away. I looked out my kitchen window. March in New Hampshire, everything still gray and flattened. Snow on the ground at the edges of the yard where the sun hadn't reached in weeks. Adrian, your mother was sick. She was on chemotherapy. And your wife called her to ask for money. He didn't answer. For a legal bill you hadn't told me about. I didn't know you didn't know, he said. That's not the same as saying you told me. We were quiet together for a moment. I said, I think we need to sit down together, the three of us. I have more questions. Renata won't do that, he said. I'm not asking Renata. I'm asking you. He said he'd think about it. He called back 3 days later. Renata didn't feel comfortable with the confrontational conversation. She thought it was better to let the past stay in the past. She'd hoped I would understand that she'd only been trying to help their family during a hard time, and that my wife had been a willing participant in her own decision. A willing participant in her own decision. That's how Renata had characterized it. My son was repeating these phrases as if he'd been given them to memorize. I thought about Ruth sitting at the kitchen table doing her medication schedule. I thought about the effort it cost her some days to lift her coffee mug. I thought about my wife, in the middle of fighting for her life, taking a call from her daughter-in-law about a contractor lawsuit, being asked, having to decide. Deciding to say yes because that's who she was, because she would not let her son suffer if she could help it, and then not telling me because she would not let me suffer either. I thought about what it costs a person to love that completely. I called Owen again. I need to know everything that's publicly available about Renata. Business, legal, financial history, public record only, nothing she wouldn't be able to find herself if she searched. He called me back in 4 days. What he found wasn't criminal, it was a pattern. Before she met Adrian, Renata had been in a business partnership in Connecticut, a consulting firm. The partnership had dissolved in 2016. Her former business partner, a woman named DIL Schwartz, had filed a civil complaint citing financial mismanagement and unauthorized use of business accounts. The case had been settled with a confidentiality clause, amounts undisclosed. Dale Schwartz had moved to Charlotte, North Carolina after the settlement. Her LinkedIn profile had no mention of the Connecticut firm. Owen had also found that Renata's mother in Providence had declared Chapter 7 bankruptcy in 2019. The $2,000 on Ruth's list took on a different texture. None of it was illegal on its own. Patterns rarely are. I sat with everything for 2 weeks. I didn't call Adrian. I didn't contact Renata. I did my taxes, finished the bookshelves, taught my community college class. I read a lot at night. Ruth always said I got very still when I was thinking seriously, that I went quiet in a way that was different from ordinary quiet. She said she could always tell. I thought about what I wanted, not what would hurt them. What I actually wanted. I wanted Adrian to understand what his mother had done for him, not as an accusation, but as a fact. She had given something real from what was left of herself. He deserved to know that fully. He'd been allowed to half know it, which meant he'd never had to sit with the whole weight of it. I wanted Renata to understand that I knew, that was all, just for her to know that the version of events where she'd handled everything quietly and gotten away with it was not the version I was living in. And I wanted something documented, for my own peace. I went to see an estate attorney in Concord, a woman named Whitfield who specialized in family estate disputes. I brought Owen's research, Ruth's list, and a timeline I'd written out by hand the previous Sunday, 40 years of family history compressed into 4 pages. She read everything while I sat across from her desk and looked at the print of the White Mountain she had hanging on the wall behind her. She said, "You're not asking me to file anything today, are you?" "No, I just want you to hold this." She understood. She made copies of everything, logged it as a consultation, said her door was open if I decided to move forward formally. She also told me gently that absent fraud or coercion, the money Ruth had given was hers to give, and legally I had no claim on it. I told her I already knew that. I wasn't there about the money. I went home and I wrote 2 letters. The first was to Adrian. I told him what I'd found, not angrily, just clearly. I told him that his mother had paid Calhoun while she was on chemotherapy, that she had liquidated her savings to help him without telling me, and that I believed she hadn't told me because she'd been asked not to. I told him I wasn't interested in his apology unless it came from a place of genuine reckoning, and that I wouldn't be waiting by the phone. I told him I loved him. I told him Ruth loved him. I told him that kind of love deserves better than to be used. The second letter was to Renata. It was shorter. I told her that I knew about Dale Schwartz, that I knew what a confidentiality clause meant, and that I also knew what it didn't cover, that I knew about her mother's Chapter 7 and the $2,000 from my dying wife's account. I told her I wasn't threatening anything. I was simply letting her know that the story she had constructed, in which she was a resourceful woman who'd handled difficult situations quietly and left the past in the past, had an audience of at least one who knew the fuller version. I told her I wished her well. I meant it, more or less. I put both letters in separate envelopes, wrote their names on the front, mailed them from the post office on Monday morning. She called that afternoon, Renata, 4 times. I let it go to voicemail. Her messages escalated. The first was measured, almost professional. She said my letter was troubling and she wanted to discuss it calmly. The second had an edge to it. She said I was making accusations I couldn't support. The third was Adrian calling, his voice strained, asking me to please talk to his wife because she was very upset. The fourth was Renata again. She said if I contacted anyone else with this information, she would speak to a lawyer about harassment. I listened to all 4 messages once, deleted them, and went back to my bookshelves. Adrian came to New Hampshire that weekend. He drove up alone. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table where Ruth and I had sat for 37 years. And he looked at his hands for a long time before he looked at me. He said he hadn't known how much it had cost her. He'd known about the condo, known she'd wanted to help. He hadn't known about Calhoun until Renata told him, after the fact, after the settlement. He hadn't known about the list. "Did you ask her not to tell me about any of it?" He said no. He said Renata had said it would be easier if I didn't know, that I'd make it complicated, that I'd insist on paying, and it would become a whole thing. He said he'd believed her because it was easier to believe her. I told him I understood that. I told him that loving someone sometimes means letting them make decisions for you that you'll have to live with later. He started crying at my kitchen table. 41 years old, crying the way he used to cry when he was small, quietly and thoroughly, like he was trying to do it without being seen. I let him. I didn't tell him it was all right because it wasn't entirely all right. But I put my hand on his shoulder after a while and we sat there in the kitchen where his mother used to make coffee, and that had to be enough for the moment. We talked for 3 hours. Not about strategy, not about what came next, about Ruth. About things she'd said, decisions she'd made, the way she'd loved people. He hadn't known she kept a list. When I showed him the paper in her handwriting, her actual handwriting, he held it for a long time without speaking. He said, "She never said a word to me." No, she wouldn't have. He asked me what I wanted him to do. I told him I didn't want anything except what I'd already done. That I'd written the letters, I'd said what I'd needed to say, and now the rest was his to work out however he needed to. That I wasn't giving him an ultimatum about Renata. That was his marriage, and I had no claim on it. But that I wasn't going to pretend the past few years had been fine. And I wasn't going to accept being disinvited from my son's life because it made things more convenient for someone who had borrowed money from my dying wife without my knowledge. He nodded slowly. He went home Sunday evening, hugged me at the door, longer than usual. That was 4 months ago. Renata did not call again after those voicemails. Her attorney sent a letter to my address, a vague document suggesting that any further communications about private financial matters would be treated as harassment. I forwarded it to the Whitfield estate attorney and filed it with everything else. Nothing has come of it, and I don't expect anything will. She was testing whether I would flinch. I didn't. Adrian calls more now. Short calls, nothing dramatic. He called last Tuesday to tell me about a woodworking podcast he'd heard and thought I might like. He called the week before to ask how the community college class was going. We talk about small things in a way we haven't in years. There's still a lot that hasn't been said between us, and some of it may never be said. That's how it is in families. The silence isn't always emptiness. Sometimes it's just two people figuring out how to be honest with each other again without burning everything down. Renata and I do not speak. I don't know if that will change. Some doors close cleanly and stay closed. I've stopped trying to predict which kind this one is. I finished the bookshelves last week. Maple with a dark walnut stain, very close to how Ruth's mother's shelves had looked in the house where Ruth grew up. I moved them into the living room and started filling them with books. Ruth's reading journals from the hospital are on the second shelf, where I can see them from my chair. Her list is inside the attorney's file in Concord. I have a copy here in my desk drawer. I look at it sometimes. Her handwriting, careful and slanted to the right the way it always was. The names, the amounts, the dates. I used to think grief was mostly about absence, about the empty chair in the quiet house and the coffee made for one instead of two. Now I think it's also about discovery, about finding out after someone is gone the full shape of what they did for the people they loved, the parts they kept quiet because that was how they loved, without needing recognition, without needing you to know. Ruth knew I would have insisted on paying. She was right. I would have. She did it her way instead, and she took that to her grave, and all I can do now is understand it. The bookshelves look good in the morning light. She would have liked them. I keep Ruth's list in my desk drawer, not framed, not displayed, just there, folded the way she folded it in her handwriting that slants to the right. Some mornings I open the drawer for a pen and see it, and I close the drawer again without touching it. That's enough. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in this story. Not the legal parts, not the letters, not the voicemails. The thing underneath all of it. My wife knew that if she told me, I would have taken over, insisted on paying the contractor myself, gotten involved in Adrian's finances, made it a whole thing. She knew me well enough to know that my help would have come with weight attached, so she handled it quietly the way she handled most things that mattered, and she took it with her. That was her integrity. It cost her something and she paid it anyway and asked for nothing back. I didn't understand that fully until I found the list, and I've had to sit with the uncomfortable truth that I might have been, in some small way, part of why she felt she had to keep it from me. That's not guilt, it's just honesty. Knowing yourself clearly, without excuse, is the beginning of becoming someone worth trusting. What Renata did wasn't a single mistake. It was a series of calculations, each one made because the previous one had worked. She learned early that people don't ask hard questions when they love someone involved. She used that. She called a sick woman and asked for money and framed it as protection. That works on people who are decent, because decent people want to believe they're helping. The pattern I found in Connecticut wasn't surprising once I understood her. It was the same logic, just an earlier chapter. I didn't expose her to punish her. I wrote that letter because I needed her to know that the version of the story where she'd gotten away with it wasn't the only version in existence. That's not revenge. That's just refusing to participate in a lie. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one from the inside. Adrian drove 4 hours to sit at my kitchen table and cry. That took something. Not courage in the dramatic sense, just a quiet willingness to be wrong in front of someone who loves you. He let things happen by looking away, and he knew it. And he came anyway. That's the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up. I'm 64 years old. I've buried my wife and taught 30 years worth of teenagers and refinished more furniture than any reasonable person needs to refinish. What I know now that I didn't know at 40 is that the most important things you'll ever do won't feel important when you're doing them. Writing those 2 letters felt small. Mailing them felt like nothing. Sitting across from Owen in a diner looking at a handwritten list felt like paperwork. But those were the moments that changed everything. You don't get to choose whether the people you love will be honest with you. You only get to choose whether you'll be honest with them and with yourself when it matters. Ruth made her choice. Adrian is making his. I made mine. The bookshelves look good in the morning light. I think she would have liked them. That's enough for now.